The Falcons did whatever it took to land Jessie Bates last year in free agency, and it paid off in a major way.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. And guys, if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Sirius Black, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. And I've been covering the Falcons for far too long, far too long. And I used to do so formerly at falcfans.com, RIP, but still going strong in this illustrious podcast. And I appreciate each and every one of you that are everydayers of this illustrious podcast, and those of you that tune in to Locked On Falcons as your first listen each and every day. And of course, if you want to become an everydayer, all you got to do is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today we are finishing our positional reviews. I don't know if I'm going to devote a full episode to special teams. We'll see. We'll probably sprinkle it in somewhere at some point. But we're wrapping up our defense at the very least with these year-end positional reviews. We'll talk later about Richie Grant, and while he may not be a starter moving forward, he still has value as a dime safety. And we'll talk about, where the Falcons could potentially find a starter in free agency this offseason. But of course, if we're going to start talking about the safety position, we have to talk about the starter that the Falcons found in free agency last offseason in Jessie Bates, the Pro Bowler and second team All-Pro. And if you go back a year ago, almost exactly to the day, as probably many of you are listening to this, we did our safety positional review then, and we talked about the Falcons doing whatever it took to land Jessie Bates in free agency as a major upgrade for their safety position. And, given the season that Jessie Bates had, I hate to be the guy that's like, I told you so, but, I can't even take all the credit, because it wasn't as if like I was the only person that believed that Jessie Bates would be a very valuable addition. I know we had Daniel Flick on the podcast around, sometime in February, and he was talking about how Jessie Bates was the sort of the whale that we needed to land, or the big fish that we needed to land in free agency. It was so obvious. But, there were some skeptics out there. There were some people that didn't believe. I'm looking at you, Jarvis Davis of Locked On Sports Atlanta. And it's understandable why Jarvis, was maybe a little late to the Jessie Bates bandwagon, because, Jarvis is a faithful husband and a good father. And he just doesn't understand that Jessie Bates doesn't believe in monogamy. And if you're confused by what I'm talking about, I'm referencing something I discussed quite a bit towards the end of the season on the many extended all 22 reviews that I did for the Locked On Falcons Insider. But we broke down a bunch of plays over those last, 6-7 weeks where Jessie Bates would go rogue and he would cheat just to cheat the coverages, try to get some interceptions. And it paid off for him throughout this past season, right? The vast majority of his interceptions this year were times when he was cheating. Right, we had multiple opposing coaching staffs commenting on, Jessie Bates broke the rules, and that's why he got that pick 6 against the Saints. That's why he picked off Bryce Young in that week 1 opener. He did it. He got an interception against the Jets, and I'm probably blanking on another interception or two that he made, all because this man is a cheater. If it has a pulse, he will absolutely step out on you in favor of that other lady, so to speak. And I absolutely love this factor in Jessie Bates' game, right? You got to find ways to entertain yourself when you're sitting down watching the all 22 of a middling football team each and every week. And the thing that entertained me to no end, and the Locked On Falcons Insider is going to attest to it, is watching Jessie Bates just completely, leave his corners out to dry on deep routes, because he's like, I'm cheating, I'm sprinting towards the line of scrimmage to try to jump this throw, and we love it, absolutely. But the issue with cheating, right, is, it's maybe not sustainable long term, right? It's kind of the idea of live by the sword, die by the sword. And while I will absolutely enjoy watching Jessie Bates try to live by the sword. I think he does the film work to be able to make it work better than probably most others. It is certainly a thing where, it may not always work, right? You know, when you step out on your lady, you might come home to, all your stuff on the front yard, on the lawn, burned, Angela Bassett walking away from the burning car, all that stuff. So, I think the Falcons need to try to upgrade that other safety spot next to Jessie Bates so that he can continue his philandering ways, right? Getting another ball hawking safety, I think, would be very valuable to this team, because when we talk about what is depth, right, and what is good depth on a football team, I think the common misconception is, oh, if you have good depth, it's because all your backups are as good as your starters. No, that's not good depth. What's good depth is having backups that don't force you to change how you play when your starters go down, right? And you wonder, okay, what happens if Jessie Bates were to get hurt? And safeties tend to get hurt. It's, relatively speaking, it's the running back of defense in terms of the most injury prone position that has the shortest shelf life in the NFL, at least on the defensive side of the ball. Running back is the shortest. And you want to be able to play the way that you normally would play, even if Jessie Bates misses a game or two, with that sort of rangy ball hawking, sort of free safety. And so I think you need to add another guy back there that can do that. We watch Richie Grant struggle in that capacity. And it's not because you think that other safety is going to be as good as Jessie Bates in that same role, but you don't have to necessarily change your complete scheme and be like, oh, we have to completely change how we're going to play defense because we don't have this capable, deep safety. Right. And, I'm reminded of, you go back to that 2021 season when AJ Terrell missed some early games and the Falcons were forced to put our favorite backup corner, TJ Green, in the lineup. And they basically got real vanilla in their defense because, like, TJ Green couldn't do AJ Terrell stuff and, couldn't come close to it. And so that's what we mean when you need to get good depth. You need to get guys. Again, you're not expecting a backup to be as good as AJ Terrell, but you want a backup to be good enough that you don't have to feel like we have to completely change our scheme to suit, the lesser level of player, right? So if you can go out there and get another safety that can give you 60, 70% of what Jessie Bates can bring, that I think that would be a great addition to this team. And so that would allow Jessie Bates to, continue his philandering, non-monogamous ways that we so readily enjoy. But, when we talked about adding Jessie Bates to this defense last year, we talked about not only bringing his playmaking ability, but we'd also talked about his ability to sort of be that guardian angel, and that would allow the other safety in Richie Grant to be a better player. And unfortunately, that was not necessarily the case. But I will make the argument that I think Richie Grant is probably a tad bit underrated and still brings value, even if it's only as a reserve player. And we'll break that down as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. Now, did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar that you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on a 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at Robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info, claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of the first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. So continuing today's Locked On Falcons, I do want to plug the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, the first of its kind. It's also available on Amazon Fire TV, giving you the insight from the local experts on all the biggest stories on the national shows across the world. And if you're looking for more local flavor, check out the Locked On Sports Atlanta's 24/7 streaming channel as well on Amazon Fire TV. So let's talk about Richie Grant. And I'm going to say something very controversial on today's episode. I don't think Richie Grant was that bad that last year. Now, I'm not going to say he played well this year. It was a disappointing season, but I don't look at Richie Grant as a lost cause that probably so many others do. I think there was good film from him this past year. It just got overshadowed by the bad film. And the good film was that Richie Grant, charting the defense this year, did a pretty decent job, and not a great, but not an incredible job, but a decent job this year in man coverage against tight ends, right? That when you look at his coverage against tight ends this year, the success rate he allowed was 50%, which is not ideal, but not like atrocious. And what was also notable was that he had the second highest forced incompletion rate on the team behind AJ Terrell this year with 18% overall, or at least in man coverage. And those forced incompletions, as I discussed on yesterday's episode, is basically any incompletion that isn't deemed QB wide receiver error or, like a batted ball from another defensive player or something like that. And what's also notable about Richie Grant is if you look at the 8 targets when he was covering tight ends on third downs this year, he only gave up 2 first downs the entire season. Now, we remember the bad plays, getting beat by Trey McBride at the end of that Cardinals game, the double move, the Sam Laporte on that 45-yard touchdown in week 3, the game winner to Cade Otton, a couple other rough plays sprinkled in there as well. But there were some good plays as well. But of course, no one cares because we only focus on the bad plays. And, to me, it's reminiscent to me of what happened with Brian Poole and Isaiah Oliver towards the end of their time here in Atlanta. With Brian Poole in that 2018 season, he whiffed on that tackle against Drew Brees, and people were like, he's trash, he's bum, get rid of him. And Brian Poole went on to finish that season pretty strong and was playing really good football down the stretch in that 2018 season. And when he went on to go to New York and play 2 pretty good years in New York as one of the better nickel cornerbacks in the NFL. And I know at least a couple of Falcon fans were like, why did Brian Poole get better when he left Atlanta? It was like he didn't get better. He played well towards the end of his Atlanta days, but people had just written him off because of one bad play in that Saints game. And I remember Isaiah Oliver early in that 2020 season defending Isaiah Oliver to folks on this podcast and being like, yeah, I don't think he's as bad as people make it out. And people were like, no, he's terrible. And then the Falcons moved him to nickel cornerback later that season. And then we watched Isaiah Oliver kind of become a fan favorite within the next year or two with good play. And so I feel like Richie Grant's in a similar situation. I think for a lot of people, they're down on Richie Grant. Understandably, he has not lived up to his draft billing as a second-round pick. But one of the fundamental differences between myself and many of you is I don't really care where a player is drafted, right? At a certain point, it doesn't really matter anymore. It's really just about, can you help me win football games? And when I sit down and watch the All-22 on a weekly basis, I'm paying attention to, are you helping me win football games? And I think Richie Grant can do that, not as a starter, but as a dime safety, right? As a third safety, his versatility to be able to play in the slot, to play deep, play in the box, to me makes him an ideal dime safety. He can cover tight ends to a decent level, right? And I'm hoping that, similar to how Isaiah Oliver seemingly blossomed with Raheem Morris as their defensive coordinator, right? That move to nickel cornerback roughly coincided with Raheem Morris taking over as the interim head coach. I think his first game as a nickel was Dan Quinn's last game as the head coach in Atlanta, but we saw Oliver continue that. I'm hopeful that, Richie Grant can have a better season in 2024 than what he had in 2023. Now, is he probably still going to be a quote unquote bust, a one contract player and, an underwhelming second round pick? Probably, maybe that ship has sailed, but it doesn't mean that he still can't contribute in positive ways to this defense moving forward as a third safety. Now, I know a lot of people were like, well, DeMarcco Hellams could be that guy. And, I thought Hellams did a solid job stepping in for Richie Grant as the sort of second safety down the stretch after the bye week. Although, again, I think part of it, I think Richie Grant actually played better after the bye week, after his benching. And again, maybe that has something to do with him being used on a more limited basis, and that's kind of the ideal role for him. But again, because people had already written him off by that point, it was like, after that Trey McBride touchdown that he gave up in that Cardinals game, people were pretty much done with Richie Grant at that point. But, I think Hellams brings some value. We've discussed before. I think he's a little bit more limited in coverage, right? And that's that puts a lower ceiling. Like to me, Richie Grant's like floor moving forward is a dime safety, and maybe there's a 4% chance that he turns into a halfway decent starter with this new coaching staff. Maybe. But like to me, Hellams' ceiling is a dime safety, right? I think he's a classic box safety. He can be functional in coverage, right? But like I don't know if he's going to be a guy that can do a lot of the things that you want, that versatility that we're talking about of having. So, I think Hellams is a good fourth safety rather than an ideal third safety, in my humble opinion. And certainly not a guy that I would pencil in as a second safety. But I think he brings good depth. I think, having guys like Grant and Hellams coming off the bench that have started games and been, quasi-productive starters is valuable for depth-wise, right? In the event of an injury to Jessie Bates or whoever the other starting safety is. But with DeMarcco Hellams, I think you bring him, Micah Abernathy to camp. They duke it out for that fourth safety role, probably primarily playing special teams next year. But if, in the event of an injury, you can feel pretty good about that guy stepping in. Richie Grant also can play special teams, so he can still contribute even if he's not as a starter. But if Richie Grant isn't starting, who will be starting next to Jessie Bates? Right? And I have a strong suspicion that the Falcons will be buyers once more in free agency, looking at several veterans that have familiarity with this new coaching staff under Raheem Morris and Jimmy Lake, and now Jerry Gray and Justin Hood. And we'll talk about some of those potential options that we could see the Falcons eyeing to do whatever it takes this offseason to get that guy into the building. And we'll talk about that as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. Now, are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure you could be that ever wonder what adventure could be right around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have lineups of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is perfect for city drives and great escapes. It's the perfect midsize crossover for your next great adventure. I can attest to this because I rented a Nissan Rogue all week long for my city drives in Mobile, Alabama last week, and I was hobnobbing with all the NFL insiders like, Mike Garafolo, and he was commenting on the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system that no longer needs your phone to connect Google Assistant, Google Maps, or Google Play Store because it's built right in. And Nissan also has an incredible lineup that includes the 2024 Nissan Armada. It's going to change what you expect from a full-size SUV. And, you can picture a rugged 4x4 that can seat up to 8 in first-class luxury and style. Tow bigger and explore further in the 2024 Armada. Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. And PrizePicks is the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. And now that the big game is right around the corner, it is finally demon time. And now you can win up to 100 times your money on your entry with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000. Demons and Goblins are the newest and most exciting way to play at PrizePicks. Squares marked with red demons and green goblins get you different payouts. You can now win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. Big games, big payouts. It's all why PrizePicks is the #1 daily fantasy sports app. So many ways to win. It's simple to play. Just pick 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projected stats, and it's just you versus the projection. Despite 3 million members playing, you're sitting there wondering, how can I possibly win? But you can, because it's just you versus the projections. And if Patrick Mahomes throws guys for just 1 yard in the big game, you win with PrizePicks. 1 entry is nailed. All you got to do is figure out a couple more. Just go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL in lowercase for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL, promo code LockedOnNFL. PrizePicks is daily fantasy sports made easy. So we are wrapping up the week talking about the safety position. And next week, we'll start taking a deeper look into the quarterback quandary that, so often plagues the Atlanta Falcons and may wind up playing the Falcons for many years to come, unless they can solve it this year. And we'll break down some different ways in which the Falcons could solve that. But we'll wrap up today's episode talking about some of the ways that the Falcons can solve their safety need, right? If Richie Grant is being relegated to being a role player and a dime player and not a full-time starter, the Falcons need to go out there and find that option to replace him this offseason. And I think it's very likely to come in free agency. There's a bunch of safeties that are going to hit the market that have familiarity and connections with this coaching staff under Raheem Morris, right? Whether we're talking about Jerry Gray, right, from Green Bay, Justin Hood, who's the new secondaries coach, who's also been in Green Bay the last couple of years. You got Jimmy Lake, spent time just most recently with the Rams alongside Raheem Morris, but also spent some time at Washington. And Washington has put out a bunch of guys into the NFL from the secondary during Jimmy Lake's time there. And so we look back at, the previous regime under Arthur Smith is, it was a lot of players that were brought in by former current coaches, right? Steve Jackson, the Falcons' former secondary coach, coached Jessie Bates for multiple seasons in Cincinnati. Right? You think that's a coincidence? The Falcons went out. Mike Hughes, right? Cornerback addition, played for Jerry Gray in Minnesota. Trey Flowers, also a Cincinnati Bengal under Steve Jackson. So this has been a pattern. I'm assuming that pattern will continue with Raheem Morris, and his coaching staff, bringing in guys that are familiar. But we'll just sort of have to see. But some of the names that we will be paying attention to as we approach free agency from the Packers, you got Darnell Savage. It's coming off a really good season. Rudy Ford, Simone Biles' husband, a.k.a. Jonathan Owens, are all hitting the market this offseason. And you look at some former Rams like Jordan Fuller, Taylor Rapp, John Johnson III are also free agents this offseason. And Taylor Rapp especially not only was a former Ram, but also was a former Washington Husky who played under Jimmy Lake. And we commented before that when Rapp was coming into the NFL, I think back in 2019, Jimmy Lake was quoted as saying he's the smartest player I've ever known or I've ever coached, right? And so at this point in time, I haven't done a deep dive on watching these guys' film, and as we get closer to March, I probably will do that. But, looking at some of the general overview, some PFF data, it looks like, if you're looking for someone that can be that sort of versatile piece similar to Richie Grant that can play deep, play in a box, play in a slot, then I think Darnell Savage and Taylor Rapp are probably the best bets because they have some familiarity with a similar role in their respective places. If you're looking for someone that's more of that deep safety, then Johnson and Fuller are better suited for that. And we'll just sort of have to see how that goes. But I think the Falcons will have some options at that safety position. I would be very surprised if between Savage, Rapp, or Fuller, none of those guys are Falcons in 2024 at this point in time. So we'll see what happens with those guys. We'll see if they make it to the market. I would assume at least one or more of those guys will hit the market, but we'll just have to see. But, if the Falcons aren't going to be able to get their answers at the starting spot in free agency, does that leave them open to drafting a safety? And I could see the Falcons drafting a safety. If this new regime isn't as sold on DeMarcco Hellams as the old regime was, right? He's not their guy, right? We've seen that with Jalen Hawkins getting replaced, by DeMarcco Hellams. It wouldn't be a complete surprise if DeMarcco Hellams gets replaced by another sort of late round guy. Now, you got Richie Grant entering a contract year this year, meaning that he'll be a free agent after the 2024 season. And if you're assuming, as we discussed earlier, he's a one contract guy and he's going to walk in free agency next year, if you're not convinced that DeMarcco Hellams can easily slide into that third safety spot, in 2025, then maybe you draft that guy that you think could be that guy in this year's draft. Now, I don't think that's going to be an early round pick. I think that's probably more likely to be a day 3 pick. Because I feel like, again, with all the free agent options that should be available, the Falcons won't need to draft use an early round pick on a safety. They can just look for a depth piece, on probably day 3, somewhere after round 4 or later or something like that. But we'll see, right? As we get closer to free agents, as I already mentioned, I'm going to dip in the film, watch, several of these guys and sort of probably wind up doing the thing we did last year and then we've done the last couple of years, come up with my own wish list of here's who I would sign to solve the Falcons' needs in free agency. Usually I come up with, like a dozen guys in the Falcons will sign like maybe 2 out of those 12 guys. So we'll see how last year, we had Caden Ellis, we had Jessie Bates. There was somebody else. I can't remember. Anyway, but that's a ways away. We'll get there at some point. But in the meantime, we're going to do some quarterback conversations on next week's episodes. We have some guests come on. I know it's been a while since we've had some regulars on the show, and I'm sure you guys are tired of hearing my voice at this point in time. So we'll get some other people's different perspective on, the recent hires as well as our offseason priorities. At some point, I do want to talk to some Rams people to get their insight into this, Raheem Morris and Zach Robinson and some of these other guys as well. So that will be something that you guys can expect in the coming weeks as we get geared up for a combine. If you want to become a Locked On Falcons insider and get access to those extended all 22 reviews that showed Jessie Bates, being non-monogamous, you can do so at the link in the description below at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnFalcons. And that will also give you access to the all 22 film breakdowns that I'm going to be doing of the quarterbacks. I mentioned on yesterday's episode that I'll be doing Spencer Rattler and Bo Nix. No, that's my bad. JJ McCarthy is up this week. Next week, my plan is to do Caleb Williams. The week after that, Drake May, and then Jaden Daniels to get you guys geared up for the combine. Then the combine will hit, and then we'll see what's what after the combine. Maybe we'll have some, veteran rumors or whatever. We'll get some more buzz, and maybe we could do Kirk Cousins. Maybe we could do Russell Wilson. Maybe we could do Justin Fields. Who knows at that point in time? So play it by ear. But hey, if you join the Locked On Falcons Insiders by hitting that link at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnFalcons, hey, you get a 14-day free trial. So you basically, if you sign up today, you're going to get access, for free for JJ McCarthy and a Caleb Williams film breakdown. And then you can decide, if you want to stick around for Drake May and Jaden Daniels. So it'll be worth your while. It's 14-day free trial, then $4.99 a month. After that, not only do you get access to these film analysis, you also get that one-on-one connection with me, right? If you're just, laying up at night, and you're like, just thinking about the Falcons, thinking about DeMarcco Hellams, thinking about whatever you're thinking about, we don't judge here on the podcast, whatever is in the deep recesses in your mind at 1 a.m., you can hit me up. That's the beauty of it, right? You get that one-on-one connection. You can ask questions. You can provide your feedback. If you just want to vent a little, I'm there for you, in the wee hours of the morning. So you can do that by hitting that link in the description below at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnFalcons to become a Locked On Falcons insider. It's well worth your while. But that's going to do it for us, guys, on today's episode. We are done with the positional breakdowns. We'll sprinkle in a special teams breakdown at some point. We'll talk about Younghoe Koo, because I saw something recently that suggested that Younghoe Koo is a potential cap cut, and I don't necessarily agree with that. But that will be a conversation for something else next week. I think they'll probably restructure him instead, but we'll see. We'll get into that next week at some point. So look forward to that. Look forward to that all 22 breakdown of JJ McCarthy on the Locked On Falcons Insider. We'll have some guests talking Cousins and Fields and probably Russell Wilson and whoever else, Mason Rudolph, whoever else is on the Falcons radar. So we'll get into all of that, guys, potentially next week. So make sure Locked On Falcons remains your first listen as an everydayer on YouTube or wherever you subscribe to podcasts. Check out Locked On Sports Today, Locked On Sports Atlanta, 24/7 streaming channel right here on YouTube. Check out Locked On NFL. And of course, there's a game, I don't know, some game that's happening this weekend. Check out Locked On 49ers, Locked On Chiefs, and I'm sure they'll give you the insights as well. So that's going to do it for us, guys. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every